Okay, so let's start the webinar. Today's webinar, Breaking the API Dependency Bottleneck in Financial Services. I'm Vedic Trivedi, Deputy Editor at Bank Automation News, and I'd like to first thank you all for joining us for today's webinar presented by WireMock. Joining me today are Uri Maoz, CEO of WireMock, and Divyeshkumar Patel, Manager, Cloud Engineering at Ally Financial. Before we get started, I'd like to remind the audience that there will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation. So please use the feature to submit all your questions for the speakers. With that, I'll pass it over to Uri to get started.
Hi all, thank you for joining. My name is Uri. I'm the CEO and co-founder for WireMock, a company in the API simulation space. And what we'll do today is to talk a bit about the challenges that we see in the financial space with regards to API consumption and development and testing in API heavy integrated environment. We'll talk a bit about API simulation, and we will mostly hear of Divyesh, who is working at Ally and one of WireMock customers. So thank you, Divyesh, for joining us. And yeah, we'll start with a few questions that I will ask. We'll show some short demo maybe later of WireMock. And yeah, we'll have an interesting conversation, and feel free to ask questions. Yes, thank you for joining again, and we'll be glad if you can tell us a bit about Ally, about yourself, your experience and role at Ally. We'll go from there.
Hey, thank you, Uri, and thanks everyone to join this session. I have over 20 years of experience in the SDLC and a strong focus on quality assurance engineering. In my current role, Manager Cloud Engineer at Ally, I lead the enterprise testing tools and engineering team. My team support and manage the various testing tools and platforms that include performance testing, automation testing, mobile testing, visual testing, and service virtualization. Also, we manage the CI/CD continuous testing patterns to trigger different type of test and push those test results to the test management. So my team provide the overall enterprise test solutions for enterprise level.
Okay, thank you. So basically, your team is a kind of a central team that delivers testing solutions, testing platform for the entire organization, right?
That's correct, Uri.
Okay, cool, nice. And yeah, you wanted to say something? Okay, maybe like talking a bit about API. You mentioned that you are managing a lot of different testing platforms. We see in WireMock a lot of activity, especially in the financial space. And from your experience, why do you think APIs became like much more central in the financial space specifically?
Yeah, sure. So what we've seen is like because of the digital transformation, we can see applications are more distributed and relied on microservices or APIs across internal and external systems. So we can see that this transformation happened across all the domain, not only the financial space that we see. Also, for sure, open banking played a significant role to utilize next on the, we can see more utilization on the API side.
Okay, so you are saying it's like kind of a market date, open banking, also the move to microservices, consumption of third party, like you have a lot of integrations that you are consuming from third party APIs. So all of that is creating an environment with a lot of different APIs that need to be consumed, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And what were the kind of the specific challenges that you faced around the development and testing in such an environment? What was creating a challenge for you specifically around the API aspect?
Sure. So at Ally, we follow the Agile and DevSecOps methodology for SDLC. With that, we are continuous testing and releasing the product. This means there are some pieces of the application that are built earlier than the others. And to perform test on those developed pieces, we need to create a mock stub or virtualized service for the dependent pieces. So simulation kind of solution remove those third-party dependency or any downstream application dependency or APIs dependency and enable us to test earlier in the development. So because of those different challenges, we can see the simulation solution help us to drive the productivity.
So basically, the challenges that you mentioned are around the fact that you have different teams developing with a lot of different APIs and microservices that maybe they are not ready yet. And then you have teams that are waiting for the APIs to be delivered and basically are stuck and cannot progress in the development and testing process, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I will add also that things that we see in the market, so Divyesh mentioned, a lot of challenges around this coordination in an environment where you have a lot of different teams and microservices, and it's very hard to coordinate around that. We also see a lot of challenges, Divyesh mentioned before, open banking, so a lot of challenges around consumption of third-party APIs. So organizations and developers and testing teams that there's challenges around how do I work in an environment where you have a lot of third-party APIs, and how do I integrate with that when it's very hard to connect from the development environment. A lot of challenges around testing environment. So you have a lot of different internal or external APIs, and we see organizations that what they are doing is to spin up a lot of testing environments that are very hard to maintain with a lot of dependencies. And sometimes we hear from customers that they are telling us that they pay more money for the testing environment than to the production environment, which is crazy. And do you resonate with these challenges, Divyesh?
That's correct. So we see like similar way, like Ally also make the multiple third-party APIs or vendors calls. All those third-party vendors did not necessary to have production-like environment for testing needs. In such a situation, this API simulation solution can help because that's way we cannot depend on the third-party APIs availability, and we can do the testing when we want, kind of.
Yeah.
So we see similar kind of situation, and we end up with these solutions here.
Yeah, and maybe we'll just say before we progress in talking about some use cases, like what is API simulation? If we have people that doesn't know what are we talking about, so can you give a few words about that and how you work with that?
Sure. So in our case, we do the like a functional testing and performance testing using the simulation here. So simulating the third-party API means we are not directly connecting to the actual API. We are just recording those APIs and mimicking those. So for that, we have different kind of solution available in the market. However, we are using the WireMock for that one. So we record those calls and capture all the inputs, we can say. We record that. So instead of when we run our load test, instead of pointing to the actual API, we now point to the WireMock or stubbed APIs, and we simulate that load or put the load on those APIs that we have recorded. So basically, instead of connecting to the actual API, we are just hitting to the mock API and do our functional testing, our load testing, our positive, negative testing.
Yeah, and so basically, like to summarize, the API simulation is an ability to simulate all the APIs that you dependent on, right? Third party and internal APIs. And you mentioned also like the internal APIs that are not ready. So basically, like you simulate the APIs if they're not ready, or the third party APIs, right? And then you can create a kind of a decoupled environment in order to run much faster in the development and testing process. So this is the nature of API simulation. Curious, I know that you had a different solution before, but assuming there is no API simulation in the world, okay, what are the implications, or what are the ways that you would try to solve it without API simulation?
Yeah, so actually we are using service virtualization solution for last 8 years. We moved to WireMock last year only, but previously 7 years we had a different solution for service virtualization. But if you ask me before 8 years, then definitely we need to wait for dependent service to be available. Then only we can test. So earlier we didn't have any option then wait. So that was the earlier challenge because we have to wait technical.
So basically, you were working in a sequential way and just waiting for things to be ready. Then you start testing that things are not working well, maybe in what you got. Now you are getting the feedback late in the process. It costs more to fix it. So this is the things that you saw before having a simulation solution. Okay, by the way, question to the side. So you mentioned that you are in charge of tools across the organization, basically delivering tools to the organization. Curious, as someone that is in charge on tools infra, how do you get the various teams in the organization to use the product that you deliver versus everyone using their own tools, and like there is a lot of time kind of objection to use the tools that the central team delivers. So what are the challenges that you see there, and how do you solve them?
Yeah, so we have actually well-defined technology assessment process to onboard any new product in Ally. So our enterprise architecture team is continuously checking that we don't have any overlapping capabilities tools. So that really help us to drive the adoption enterprise level. And this process actually eliminating the isolated tool. We cannot have isolated tool, basically teams level. They required to what they needed, like a capabilities levels. They come to the enterprise architecture review. And from that architecture itself, like architecture team itself, push them to use the central tool instead of going to one-off tools. But I know like those kind of challenges I heard from different organizations where it's a more silos, then you will see like a end up with multiple tools with the same capabilities.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So you have a well-defined process that kind of help to streamline that. So there are no teams that are using like tools individually, or there are still like teams that will use different tools by themselves without asking anyone.
So that is like I say, like we have a well-defined process. So we used to have that one, but we have a basically centralized team or enterprise architecture come in the picture to review all those. If its tools have same capabilities, then why we have that way cleanup happen and all the consolidation happen.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Interesting about this process. So getting back to API simulation, you mentioned before some of the use cases. So can you share again like some of the kind of use cases that you are using it for? You mentioned load test and other aspects. Tell a bit about that. And yeah, we'll be glad to hear a bit more details about the various use cases.
Yeah, sure. So part of our agile process or this development, like continuous development, we have a piece ready, but on the same time, we don't have the environment that can handle the full load test for third-party APIs, right? In this case, what we are doing is simulating that particular third-party APIs, and we load test on our build developed or developed piece on Ally side. So we basically move that third-party API and we do the load testing. So we heavily using this service virtualization with a load testing, but not only limit to that. We do some level functional testing where we just validate, okay, if we have some kind of request, what kind of response should be come up, right? Also with that, we do the negative, positive validation as well. So we do not only load testing, it's like a non-functional testing. We do the functional and non-functional, both testing with this.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And you mentioned negative testing and so on, and you are also using like different kind of wording. We are saying simulation, virtualization, mocking. The way that we usually like to look at that is that the sophistication level of the simulation. Mocking usually is pretty basic. You get like you are calling and maybe you're getting like static response to what you are sending. And then what WireMock is doing and other service virtualization platform is to deliver like real production simulation that really enable to simulate like real world scenarios. So when you're working with a system, how important it is for you to work with a system that will be very enable you to simulate like real world scenarios versus using just a basic mocking tool that is doing like something very basic.
Yeah, so if you see in the market, there are a number of tools, right? They do the mocking. Mocking is a basic functionality for any tool. That way you can see. But when it's come to the define that the same thing with the real-time scenario, we want to test it with a real-time scenario. I just gave the one example. We used to do like a mobile testing with a virtual device, right? or simulators. Now we are doing the same thing with the real device because we just want to make sure what we are testing is accurate. So those kind of situations, we want to make sure it's not just like a mocking, it's more like we are seeing as a real-time scenario validation. So this kind of like WireMock kind of solution where they help us to do the real-time scenario validation, not just the mock.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Basically, what we like a lot of time when we are talking about, like I mentioned before, mocking versus virtualization, a lot of time we'll have people coming to us and asking about the different terms. And really, the key thing is about the ability to simulate real world scenarios in a way that is scalable, that enable you to also maintain the simulation in an easy way. So being able to deliver like dynamic responses and negative testing that you mentioned, that is enabling to test how your app behave when there are like some errors or delays in the APIs that you are using. And also one more thing that we see very common, especially in the financial industry, is the ability to use like stateful simulation. Stateful simulation means that you can keep a state and basically like between calls, you will be able to update the state. Let's say it's a balance of your account and you are doing like credit and deposit and so on. So that will be very important to simulate like transactions workflows. So with that, actually, I want to take 5 minutes and show something in WireMock Cloud about how you simulate like a transaction, a full transaction, and not like doing something very basic, which a lot of times is the different. So I will share my screen. And what I will show, I will talk about, Divyesh was talking about the use case where you have a challenge to coordinate between different team members. So basically, 1 second, I will just put it on the entire screen. And so you have a challenge to coordinate between a team member. Maybe an API is not ready yet, and now you are the application team, the front-end team, and you want to simulate the back-end APIs in order to be able to progress in your testing and your development of a front-end application. So here we did an example of an app ATM interface. And in this example, the ATM is ready, but it can also not be ready. And then what we will show how you can advance in your functional and performance testing and so on of the front end with the backend that is stimulated, and maybe the backend is not ready yet. So you define the contract, but the backend is not ready yet. And what we see here, this is WireMock Cloud, and in WireMock Cloud specifically, we created like an example of few stubs. Basically, the simulation or mock is the endpoint that you are mocking. You have an endpoint that you call to, and then you have different stubs that represent different use cases of the endpoint. Okay, so here we have a debit, which will say, okay, I want to debit from the account. And we have credit, both are post messages because there is no like response here in that sense. And here we have a get balance for account, and you will see that basically every stub in WireMock has a request that is saying how, from all the different calls that will be called to the system, why would you match on that? Okay, and we see that the match will be like if you have account/account ID, okay, and you can call with any account ID, which is the dynamic match. We have the state that enable you to keep state, and here we see that we keep the balance of the account. Okay, so the balance of the account will be like a key value store that we can hold the values, and the response is generating dynamic response that is taking the account ID and the balance and creating it from that. And what we'll see here, we have the main account. We can also add a new account. Okay, and let's say this is Divyesh, and we want to give Divyesh like a lot of money. Okay, so we will credit it. And basically what we see is that we credited the account and we updated the amount. We can now say, okay, let's debit it. And what is happening here in this process is that every time that we are doing this call, it's actually going to WireMock Cloud. And again, imagine that the backend doesn't exist yet. So now you can do your entire testing. We can go to the request log and see that the entire calls are actually being called to WireMock Cloud. And we can also do something Divyesh mentioned, like negative testing. So you can change to false, or you can add the delay. Okay, and let's say we are already in 10 seconds delay to get the value, and we will see that what will happen here. You know what, maybe I'll do it like 5 seconds, so it will be faster, or 4 seconds. Okay, So we'll not wait a lot, but what we are seeing here, that basically we see that the app is actually not behaving correctly, because you see what happened, it didn't wait to the response, and now we change it only after a few seconds. So we can identify problems and fix them much easier in the testing process. So this is an example how you are doing something that simulates real world scenarios. That is very important in the financial space, and we see it quite often. I hope yeah.
Yeah, thanks Ray, for sharing that. We are not using currently stateful mocking feature, but I can see we have some use case where we are planning to try it out soon. So thank you for sharing that.
Great. And maybe we are trying to make it a session about API simulation, not about WireMock, but can you share your experience with WireMock? Like, why did WireMock even answer your needs? I know that you were looking for a solution, so we'll be glad to hear about your experience.
For sure. So far, we had really positive experience with WireMock. It's starting from onboarding, right? So WireMock team conducted a workshop with my engineering team and provided a very insightful training on the WireMock and showcase all the simulation capabilities. Also provided a migration solution for our existing virtualized services. After that, for continuous support, chat option you guys provide is really provide a timely manner response on the technical needs. Also, you have a good support documentation. So we are overall, we see it's a really good support available. One experience I can share is we had one requirement where PDF file needs to be stubbed response. With the WireMock team guidance, quickly created a base 64 encoded response for the PDF file and validate that scenario. So that was like huge help for us because that specifically when we are come across the unique needs and get the required solution immediately. So overall, my experience with WireMock was it's easy to use and with excellent support service. So all in all, it's so we are happy with that.
Great to hear. Thank you for that. And maybe like we talked a bit about before about service virtualization, API mocking, API simulation. Like service virtualization is not a new term. There are quite a lot of traditional service virtualization platform from large companies. So how do you see WireMock and maybe the new tools of simulation versus the service virtualization tools or platforms that were in the market before? What are the kind of the main differences that you see between them? And I know that you also migrated from an older service virtualization platform. So what were also why now? Like, why did you decide to migrate? Like you had something working.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we are using WireMock from last 1 year. We are using service virtualization capability itself from last 8 years. We had a previous tool, and that required really extensive setup to virtualize the service. And because of that, it's hard for users to learn and use. So we see it like when you have not straightforward setup or not easy to use, then you will not see the usage-wise scale up, right? So that's what we've seen in our experience. And because of that, we started looking the different solutions that are available in the market. And that's where we end up with a WireMock with our assessment and all. So we found have what we needed capability wise. And that's where we started using the WireMock from last 1 year. But we have used one of the tools that you can see one traditional large company solution.
Yeah. And how was the migration? Was it painful or was it fairly smooth?
Initially, we felt it's hard to do, but after getting the help from a WireMock architect, he guided us how we can do that migration over. So it was a straightforward after that. But initially, we felt, oh, we are using this existing for 7 years now. We have so many service was virtualized, how we can move out. We need to rework and all. But we found the solution from the WireMock and it was like a straightforward migration.
Okay, good to hear. Okay. And so basically one interesting thing that you mentioned is that the previous tools where you had like maybe an admin team that is creating like a simulation for other people because it was so hard and you wanted to democratize the use of simulation. So moving to a more modern approach helped in that sense. Cool. Maybe two last questions and then we'll take questions from the attendees. When you introduce new tools or practices that shift the team mental model, like we said here, maybe they used to come to you to ask for simulation, and now you say, okay, you all now need to do it by yourself because there is a new platform to do that is easy. How do you help engineers and testers to internalize the value that rather than seeing as another mandate? How do you push people to actually use the new platform? Tips that you have around that?
Yeah, so like we typically always start with pilot group, like on one team or one application. We showcase the capabilities and we show the value of what we're getting out of it. This actually help us to drive the adoption easily. My team help on each steps of implementation and continuous coordinating the required training workshop with partnering with our tools vendor, but that's why we are helping to from starting to end continuous providing the required training, and also that's way it will be it's make adoption easy. If you just give the tool and say from use this one, then it will be hard because it's a lot of effort behind that. So we are just helping continuous to onboard and sustain the.
Nice. Okay, maybe last question from my side, like we're getting back to the simulation and the challenges of the API dependency environment. Do you have tips for other people that face such challenges? Like how to solve these challenges when they are looking for a solution?
So I can see like any tools onboarding, what you need to focus. That is, as you said, like it's not only about the WireMock, right? It's if you see like in the market, there are a number of tools, right? And when you looking the WireMock or any service virtualization solution, I can say focus the capability what you are looking, right? Don't see like what the tools is providing. Instead of because tools may provide so many different features, but what you really needed in your area, right? So instead of a product, you may see like what capabilities you needed and start with that one. And with that, not only that part, like a capabilities, infrastructure setup, security compliance, and cost. Those are all main factor to pick any tools. As I'm working in this different tools so many years, so this is all our best practices. Seeing instead of seeing the product itself, we'll see the capability, what we needed, what gap we have currently, and which product can solve that gap. And we can start from that.
Okay, cool. Sounds great recommendations. Okay, great. So with that, we'll move it back to Vladik to answer any questions from the attendees. But yeah, I hope that it was interesting to hear about API simulation that renewed a bit of some concept, and to hear from Divyesh experience that is highly experienced in the space. So thank you again, Divyesh.
Thank you.
Thank you both for this insightful and wonderful discussion. For audience members, a quick reminder that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, so feel free to submit any questions that you might have. Apart from that, while listening through this discussion, I have a few follow-up questions of my own. So I'll start with Uri. First, can you tell me, does WireMock support any kind of on-premise solutions?
Yeah, WireMock is called WireMock Cloud. We call the product the WireMock Cloud when we are at the cloud. But yeah, we have on-premise deployment for organizations that cannot use anything in the cloud. And we also have hybrid mode where you have agents running locally, but the configuration is in the cloud, and then it's being pulled and running locally for a very good developer, local development experience. So yeah, we support multiple options.
Do you also have any AI offerings in the pipeline that you plan on rolling out or you have already rolled out?
Yeah, so the way that we see AI is that there are a lot of surveys, and there was recently the Google Dora report that is talking about the fact that code velocity has grown meaningfully, but not a kind of a developer productivity. So basically, you have a lot of code generated, but when you want to move it to production, you have a lot of challenges. And what WireMock is positioning in the AI space is that we help close this gap between the code velocity to the production readiness, okay? Because eventually, when you run with the agent code that is generated, you need to run iterations in order to improve the code quality. So we have an MCP server for WireMock that enables you to embed WireMock MCP server in your IDE and basically generate simulations from your IDE run the code-generated run iteration with simulations coming for WireMock that helping to improve the code quality and be more ready for production.
Divesh, I have a question for you. Given that you have been working with WireMock for a decent amount of time, can you give us any ROI or KPI metrics that you have found in your use of WireMock?
Sure. So I may be not able to give all the numbers, but I can give some level. So that will give you the idea to everyone. So creating stub using WireMock is simple and easy. We are not dependent on the other teams or third-party vendors APIs to do our testing activity. Obviously, this saves a lot of times and cost. We are currently actually testing 20 plus external API using WireMock. And we are not only doing, as I said earlier, like a functional testing, but we are doing running the load test as well as positive and negative testing scenarios. So for sure, improve the productivity with removing all the dependency of third-party APIs or other downstream APIs, and that overall increase the productivity.
Earlier in the conversation, you guys were talking about open banking, and Uri, I have a question on that. Are you seeing a higher demand for your services as financial services industry as a whole is slowly inching towards open banking?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Earlier in the chat, you guys were talking about open banking, and I wanted to ask if you are seeing a higher demand for your API mocking services as the industry is going towards open banking.
Yeah, definitely, because open banking means that you need to expose your data and enable organization to work with your API. So we see a lot of demand for API simulation because of that, where there are two directions. First of all, organizations now develop much more cross-organization integration. So they have a lot of external dependencies that they need to integrate with, specifically in the banking industry. So let's say you're a fintech company and you need to connect to a lot of banking APIs because of Open API. And the second part that we see is actually from the side of the provider that is now required to expose its API via developer portal and give good experience for external developers to onboard on the API. So this is also a challenge that we help with because the organization can create simulation of their APIs to deliver a smart sandbox for external developers. So definitely the open banking mandate is driving a lot of need for API simulations.
Yeah, I just add one thing here. Uri, you touch everything, but I see like the another piece around it. It's a different vendor, different tools, integration is there, and everything happening through the API. So we have to test it out, those how it will work, and also obviously simulation or service virtualization kind of tool help those validation too.
With that, our webinar comes to a conclusion. Thank you so much to both of you for sharing your insights with us and to our audience members for participating in this great discussion presented by WireMock.
Thank you
Thank
very
you, everyone.
much. Yeah,
Thank you all.
Divyesh, for joining us. We appreciate that, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Goodbye.